Lake Skogsvann, located at the northern fringes of Tromsø, lay ensconced in a thick blanket of fog, the dampness seeping not just into the air, but deep into the very souls of those daring enough to approach. This place had been quiet, almost forgotten for centuries, but no resident of Tromsø would dare speak of it lightly. The old wooden house rising above its shores had stood abandoned for decades, left to the mercy of the wind and rain. With its weathered facade and sagging roof, it appeared like a forgotten sentinel, guarding secrets that the world had long since turned its back on. Yet on this fateful day, the house was destined to come back to life, if only for a fleeting moment, thanks to Eleanor Drake. Eleanor, a writer from London, had arrived seeking solitude to finish her latest novel. She longed for a reprieve from the chaotic streets of the city, a place where inspiration could flow as freely as the northern rivers. She had heard tales of the wild nature that surrounded Tromsø, and the northern lights that stretched across the night sky, painting the heavens in a myriad of colors. But it was the lake, and the abandoned house perched precariously above its shores, that had called to her most fervently. From the moment she arrived, an inexplicable pull resonated within her, as if this place harbored something far beyond mere stories of its former inhabitants. As she gazed out at the lake, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that she was not the first to be drawn here. The fog swirled ominously over the water, and for a fleeting moment, she thought she caught sight of a figure dancing in its depths. Shivering, she brushed the thought aside. It was merely the remnants of a long journey and the lingering fatigue of travel. Little did she know that the enchantment of Skogsvann had already begun to weave its web around her, pulling her closer to the secrets that lay hidden beneath its surface. Autumn in Tromsø was harsh and inhospitable, a relentless descent into winter. Cold winds cut through the air, carrying the scent of decaying leaves and the moisture that penetrated every nook and cranny. Eleanor stood on the creaking porch of the house, her breath visible in the frigid air as she gazed down at the lake. Skogsvann appeared strangely calm, its surface smooth as a mirror, reflecting the dull gray sky above. The fog rising above the water seemed to have a life of its own, swirling lazily yet persistently, teasing her with its mysterious allure. The house, though it appeared to be a crumbling ruin from the outside, was surprisingly well preserved within. The old wooden beams still stood strong, and the spacious rooms held a cold elegance of bygone days. Dust motes danced in the slanted light that filtered through the grimy windows, and the air was thick with the scent of wood and something else, something earthy and ancient. In the living room stood a fireplace, around which heavy carved chairs were arranged, their surfaces dust-covered yet still dignified. Everything in this place seemed suspended in time, as if waiting for someone to breathe life back into it. That first night, Eleanor settled in with a cup of tea and her notebook, the flickering firelight casting shadows that danced along the walls. Yet sleep eluded her, replaced instead by a growing unease. As she lay in bed, the sound of the wind howling outside seemed to carry whispers, curling around her consciousness like the fog surrounding the lake. She dreamt of strange, unnatural images, swirling lights above the water, shadows moving in the misty vapors, and whispers she could not comprehend. When she awoke, drenched in sweat, the air in the house felt icy, a stark contrast to the heat of her dreams. Approaching the window, she peered out into the darkness, and her heart raced as she saw flickering points hovering over the lake, resembling delicate lights. She knew that in this remote part of Norway, There were no buildings to cast such reflections. Confusion flooded her thoughts, but just as quickly as she tried to shake it off, the sensation of being watched crept over her like a chilling fog. Then came the footsteps. At first, Eleanor thought it was the wind, but the sounds were too clear, too rhythmic. Her heart pounded as she turned suddenly, only to find no one there. Just shadows, morphing and dancing on the walls as if taunting her. Something in the air shifted, thickening with anticipation. Eleanor felt an overwhelming sense of unease settle into her bones, leaving her with an unsettling realization. She was not alone in this house. The next morning, Eleanor resolved to visit the town of Tromsø, seeking the warmth of humanity amid her rising anxiety. The streets were quiet, almost deserted, with a thin layer of mist hanging over the cobblestones. She found a small cafe serving hot coffee and chose a table by the window, hoping the warmth of the drink would soothe her frazzled nerves. As she sipped the steaming liquid, she watched the townspeople drift by, their faces obscured by scarves and hats, shrouded in their own secrets. It was there, in the cozy cafe, that she met Jens, an elderly man with a weathered face marked by deep wrinkles and eyes that seemed to hold a lifetime of stories. He sat down across from her without invitation, his presence commanding and unsettling. "I heard you rented a house by Skogsvann," he said, his voice gravelly as he leaned closer, a conspiratorial glint in his eye. Eleanor looked at him, surprised. "Yes," she replied cautiously. "It's a beautiful place." Jens snorted, but there was no joy in his laughter. "Beautiful?" he echoed, shaking his head. "Skogsvann was once beautiful, but it has long ceased to be a place anyone would want to approach." His tone shifted, growing somber. "Do you know why that house stands abandoned? The people who lived there did not return the same. If they returned at all." A chill raced down Eleanor's spine at his words. She didn't want to indulge in superstitions, but something in the way Jens spoke instilled a primal fear within her. It was a certainty that seemed to permeate every word, as if he were recounting something he had witnessed himself. "Something is out there on the lake," Jens continued, his gaze distant, lost in memories she couldn't grasp. "I don't know what exactly, but people who get too close start seeing things, hearing things, and then they disappear." His voice trailed off, leaving an ominous silence hanging between them. Eleanor felt the weight of his words pressing down on her, yet her curiosity was piqued. She couldn't shake the feeling that whatever dark secrets Skogsvann harbored were the very things she sought to uncover. She thanked Jens and left the cafe, a sense of foreboding settling within her as she returned to the house. As night descended upon the landscape, Eleanor found herself enveloped in the eerie silence that accompanied it. The fog grew thicker, nearly impenetrable, as if nature itself sought to isolate the house from the rest of the world. Inside, she lit a fire in the hearth, its warm glow providing a false sense of security against the chilling shadows that crept into the corners of the room. Hours passed as she attempted to write, but her thoughts were consumed by the stories Jens had shared, their weight pressing down on her creativity. Just when she thought she might finally drift into slumber, a soft knocking sound interrupted her concentration. It was not the usual sound that wind or branches brushing against windows might create. This was rhythmic, deliberate, as if someone were trying to get her attention. Eleanor froze, her breath catching in her throat. The sound came from the hallway, and against her better judgment, she rose to investigate. Her heart raced as she approached the door, each step echoing in the heavy silence that filled the house. A strange dampness appeared on the wall, slowly seeping into the boards, chilling her to the bone. She ran her fingers over the surface, feeling the cold moisture. Suddenly, vibrations rippled beneath her feet, quiet but palpable, as if the ground itself was moving, awakening from a long slumber. A whisper, barely audible, reached her from the darkness. Eleanor recoiled, her heart racing as adrenaline coursed through her veins. The whisper seemed to curl around her, a seductive call that both terrified and intrigued her. Her eyes widened as she looked down and noticed something that should not have been there. Wet footprints appeared on the floor, leading from the door to the fireplace as if someone had just stepped into the house, straight from the lake. Panic surged within her as she stepped back, her pulse quickening. What was happening? Was it her mind playing tricks on her? Or had the lake indeed begun to claim her? The house felt alive, thrumming with secrets and stories waiting to be told. Eleanor understood at that moment that her journey had only just begun. Lake Skogsvann had never been an ordinary body of water. It concealed an ancient mystery that even the oldest residents of Tromsø could not explain, tales of flickering lights dancing on the surface during the dark of night had become local folklore, whispered among children and adults alike. Those who claimed to have seen them were often hushed, their stories dismissed as the wild imaginations of small-town dreamers. But Eleanor felt a growing conviction that there was a deeper truth beneath the surface of those shimmering waters. Determined to uncover the past, Eleanor visited the local library, where she pored over old records and dusty newspapers. It was there that she unearthed fragments of the tragic history surrounding the house she had rented. The Larson family, who had last lived there, had vanished without a trace, parents and children alike, leaving behind only whispered legends of their disappearance. Locals claimed they hadn't left. The lake had swallowed them whole, drawn them into its depths, like a siren luring sailors to their doom. With each revelation, Eleanor felt as if the lake was watching her, its gaze piercing and inquisitive. She began to hear whispers echoing in her mind, the shadows on its surface morphing into figures, vague and blurred yet unmistakably real. They beckoned her, calling her name in a soft, mournful chorus. The lake was alive, and it yearned for something, or someone. That night, as Eleanor returned home, the atmosphere thickened around her. The air was electric with anticipation. She could feel the weight of the lake's gaze upon her, pressing against her skin. Was it merely her imagination? Or did the water ripple in response to her thoughts? She stood at the window, gazing into the murky depths, and found herself lost in the flickering reflections, entranced by the mysterious dance of light and shadow. Despite the warnings from Jens echoing in her mind like a swarm of wasps, Eleanor felt an irresistible pull towards the lake. It was as if the very essence of Skogsvann had seeped into her soul, awakening a hunger for discovery that overshadowed her fear. Night after night, the whispers grew louder, weaving a tapestry of despair and allure, beckoning her closer to the water's edge. One fateful evening, the fog descended once more, thick and oppressive, shrouding the world in silence. Eleanor stepped out of the house, her heart racing, the low, cautionary murmur of the wind brushing against her ears. She approached the shore, where the water's surface gleamed like black glass under the dim moonlight. In the distance, flickering lights danced, drawing her in like a moth to a flame. As she reached the water's edge, her mind filled with visions, images of the Larson family, their laughter echoing through the house, their joys and sorrows intertwining with the fabric of time. The memories washed over her, intertwining with her own, until she could no longer tell where she ended and they began. Each step pulled her closer to the water, as if the lake possessed a magic that compelled her to unveil the mysteries concealed beneath its depths. Standing at the very edge, she heard the whispers once more, louder and more insistent than ever. Echoed the voices from the water, wrapping around her like a lover's embrace. The promise of answers and connection was too intoxicating to resist. Without hesitation, Eleanor closed her eyes, surrendered to the magnetic pull, and submerged herself into the lake. The cold water enveloped her like a thick cloak, dragging her deeper into the darkness, where time ceased to exist. As she descended, the crystalline depths swallowed her whole, the weight of her fears dissipating in the embrace of the lake. No one witnessed her vanish into the abyss, and the morning mist began to shroud Skogsvann once more, concealing every trace of her presence. As the sun rose over the horizon, illuminating the world in warm golden hues, Tromsø continued on, oblivious to the fact that Eleanor Drake had vanished without a trace. The lake, however, remained silent, its waters whispering tales of those who had not escaped their fate. Eleanor became part of the legend that no one spoke of, but all felt, a haunting reminder that within its depths lay something dark, waiting for the next soul brave enough to come too close.